Okay, so we are looking at the Rakano cards, and yeah. Let me start over. Today we're looking at Rakano cards, that is to say, Fire and Justice, the combination of the element of creation and destruction and the element of order. And the basic result of that tends to be a lot of armored dudes who belong to the rebellion of the Crownwatch. I think it's the Crown... Well, no, actually, the Crownwatch is Argenport's guardianship, so the rebellion would be the people who are the deserters. That's why you have Crownwatch Deserter, of course. In addition, you also have some cool, like, Oni folks and other people who are sort of on the outskirts of Argenport. You have just a general, like, ragtag band of wonderful folks who are making weapons and using them to fight Roland with all of their power. And the general idea behind Rakano tends to be a lot of aggro in the form of units and weapons. They're very, very focused on that sort of confluence of units and weapons and people equipped with a lot of stuff and just doing cool things with war cries and all of the fun things that Fire and Justice shares. Our first card is Fearless Nomad, the 3-1 Overwhelm. Actually, I suppose our first card is Rakano Banner, and we might as well talk about the banners and the seats first things first. I'm not going to talk about all of the banners when we talk about hybrid cards, but it is important to talk about banners in general. So the idea behind banners and seats and seals is that primarily you are deciding what you want based on the constraints of your deck. In general, seats are usually better than banners, but if your deck is really, really aggressive, you can get away with banners instead of seats. That depends on if you have a lot of monocolored drops in your early turns, and in general, if you want to hit a specific amount of influence requirements. If you have deep influence requirements, say cards like Icarius, the Liberator, then that's the kind of time when you want to run both banners and seats, and I think it's a really good idea to do it that way. You don't want to run diplomatic seals or anything like that. Banners can very rarely be played undepleted on turn 1. There are a couple of circumstances where that is not true. In particular, Ephemeral Wisp, or not Ephemeral Wisp, but Lumen Shepherd will put a Wisp out that you can activate your banners with. But for the most part, you really generally want to play the seats first and then the banners. The banners, however, are pretty solid for aggro decks, and you will usually always be able to play them undepleted. So yeah, Fearless Nomad, 3-1 Overwhelm, 4-1. This card was too good, and then it got nerfed to not have Overwhelm, and now it has Overwhelm again, because just Rakano in general has balanced out a little bit, so this card is pretty reasonable. This card is actually very strong. It's a really, really good pickup if you can get it in draft, because as a 3-1 with Overwhelm, it's something that's really, really effective to be equipping units to, and it almost always trades with just all sorts of things on the board. At the very least, it's going to trade with your opponent's 1-drop, and then probably deal 2 damage to their face. If it gets equipped, however, it's actually really scary. And that's 2 things that you want to see in, like, basically what you want to see in early drops is you want to see something that can trade very well, and then if anything happens to it or any sort of synergy is exploited, it just becomes bananas, which is what makes Fearless Nomad amazing in draft. I think it's actually a really, really solid card for these types of decks. And of course, hybrid cards in general are just generally really solid for pushing that kind of extra stuff. Like, they just always have a little bit more power. They're harder to play. Fearless Nomad is rarely a 1-drop in draft because banners are the only thing that you can pick up in draft, so it's pretty hard to actually get the... Wait, can you pick up seats? I can't remember. But it's actually pretty hard to get this card down on 1. Regardless, as a 2-drop, it trades very, very well, and it's pretty excellent in draft for that respect. In Ranked, this card is actually super strong. You can play it in Rakano decks. There aren't any current decks that are running it, but it does work very well in all of those decks, especially the big heavy Warcry decks and the big heavy weapons decks. There's a whole subset of Rakano that is devoted to Fearless Nomad that worked very well. It's fallen out of the meta, but it's a solid, solid archetype. And then, of course, there is a Rakano Jito deck that was so insanely strong that they nerfed Frontier Jito. Now that Jito's not doing so great, I think that Fearless Nomad is a little bit less playable in Ranked, but all the same, very, very efficient stats, good stat line, and really decent amount of damage means he's the premier card for hyper aggro Rakano, which is to say more hyper aggro than it already is, and there's quite a lot of hyper aggro Rakano. We've got Champion of Glory, a 1-1 for 2. This one becomes a 3-3 with Quick Draw and Endurance if you have both Fire and Justice. You have to fill requirements to get the +2 attack and Quick Draw, and the +2 health and endurance. But it's a fairly cheap requirement. It's usually pretty easy to get Champion of Glory up to 3/3. Champion of Glory is, of the champions, the easiest one to fulfill requirements on. So yeah, he's a pretty solid card. A fully realized champion is a bananas good card for its rate. Like a 2-cost 3/3 with quick draw and endurance is pretty nuts to deal with, equips really well, and can continue to actually like block if you are in a situation where you would want to block. So against things like Rakano Artisan, or against any sort of 2-drop that your opponent might have. Champion of Glory is basically just the most powerful 2-drop if you can get the influence requirements. So most Rakano decks that run him run both banners and seats, and they do pretty well at getting Champion of Glory to be reliable and generally do everything you want it to do. He's a crazy good card. Quick Draw is a very powerful effect, and Champion of Glory is a strong card in both draft or ranked because it's very easy to get that Quick Draw and endurance set up, so he's a very solid Rakano card for that reason. And Quick Draw is generally what I would consider to be an evasive ability. In other words, it is something that allows you to push damage very easily and pressure your opponent and just force them not to be able to trade with your own units. So I think Quick Draw is crazy good, and Champion of Glory is a good example of how a 2-drop without Warcry can belong in Rakano. Rakano Artisan, 2/1, summon all weapons in your deck, get +1/+1. This card is pretty great for Armory decks in particular, and the Armory archetype is something that we're going to have to do a deck tech on pretty soon. It's a crazy fun card. This card used to be a 2/2, and yeah, the nerf was much deserved. Now that it's actually somewhat killable, I think it's a fairly reasonable card all the same. In Armory decks, you don't have a lot to do on turn 2, and as far as turn 2s go, this is one of the best that you can get. Keep in mind that the all weapons in your deck get +1/+1 is essentially a Warcry that applies to probably maybe 3 or 4 cards you're going to be drawing over the course of a game. In Armory decks, sometimes it can be more, but it's not always an amazing amount of value. Nonetheless, it is a 2/1 that gives at least a +1/+1 bonus to something else for 2, so Artisan can be a really solid card to set up your later game and give you extra health. And when you put it on relic weapons in particular, that's something that really stymies the more aggressive decks, the burn decks, because weapons having health just gives you extra health when you use them, and it gives you a lot more value for your weapons. Rakano Artisan is a very, very powerful effect. In draft, it's not particularly strong, but a 2/1 that gives you some mild bonuses is not awful, so I'd probably play it. I think it's, you know, not amazing, but it's okay. It's just enough damage to actually be kind of a pressure card, and beyond that, it's not really all that relevant, but it's okay in draft. And then yeah, ranked premier staple card of Armory, basically the reason that the Armory archetype exists. Crownwatch Deserter, 3/3 Warcry. This is one of your just amazing draft commons. This card is really, really good in terms of just overall stats and damage plus the Warcry. It's pretty much always going to get a Warcry, which means that you're providing at least 4/4 in stats for 3. That tends to work out very, very well for you. If Crownwatch Deserter is left unattended, then it really takes off with the draft game. So another good card to be equipping. Basically, Rakano cards that love to be equipped are always nice, and this card's really, really efficient on rate. In ranked, it's just a little bit off. Like, you usually don't end up playing it as often, but I think if you have the right type of creature focus, Crownwatch Deserter is a solid include in certain Rakano decks. It basically just depends on if you want to sacrifice the 3 slot of like Sword of Icaria for more unit-based strategies so that you can equip more unit-based weapons to your stuff. And basically everything in Rakano aggro decks is about increasing reliability and increasing redundancy, so Crownwatch Deserter is something that provides that redundancy and does it very, very well. She's very, very good at her job. She's very comparable to all of the other Rakano 3-drops, and I would say that she's a solid include in a ranked deck, if not a meta staple. Ijin, Imperial Armorer. Pay 4 and exhaust Ijin to play a +4/+4 Mithril Armor on another one of your units. As a legendary, I'm not particularly impressed with Ijin. There are a lot of things that I don't like about her. One is that sort of difficult influence cost of double red and green at 3. The more influence symbols that you have at the lower tiers, the more unlikely it is that you're actually going to play that card for its assigned cost. Ijin plays okay on turn 7, but if she plays on turn 7, she gets a single +4/+4 mithril armor on another one of your units, and then she probably dies to something else. However, she can run away with a game if she's left unattended, and that makes her a decent include in quite a few different ranked decks, especially ones that utilize cards like Silverwing Familiar, Crownwatch Paladin, anything that has Aegis on it and can generally defend a +4/+4 mithril armor. I actually really liked Ijin as a design when she was a 5-cost 5/5, and she could exhaust to play mithril armors on everything, but that card just didn't see a lot of play because it was fairly weak. This one does see a little bit of play in ranked decks, and that's pretty neat, and I think that overall the design is really fun. I like Ijin a lot. I want her to see a little bit more love, but I think that she's got a good design and she's efficient enough to actually be pretty relevant. Alright, Sword of Ikaria, 3/2 Warcry. Probably the best relic weapon in the game? Let's think about it. It's hard to say, but in terms of uncommons, this is probably the first uncommon you want to craft if you're starting out. I would say that this card is just bananas good at giving you removal, Warcry, a level of like inevitability against control decks. This card is incredibly versatile and does a lot of different things. Oftentimes it's just a removal spell that gives you maybe a little bit of health or maybe just a Warcry on top of your deck. Either way, this card is really, really strong. It kills just about everything early on, including all of the units with Aegis, so if you're having issues with Aegis, relic weapons are the place to go, and Sword of Ikaria is really, really strong at doing that. There's really nothing I don't like about this card. Relic weapons are really good in general, and that extra health actually really matters, because if you get Warcries on Sword of Ikaria, either from other Warcry units or from Sword of Ikaria itself, the card becomes completely bananas, and it's really, really hard to deal with. So Sword of Ikaria is a crazy fun card. I think definitely run it if you can. And yeah, it's the staple 3-drop in Rakano. There is almost not a better one. Battlelore Centaur, Endurance Charge. Now, most hybrid cards are strong enough on rate that they make very, very good ranked includes. Battlelore Centaur is not one of those cards. As a 2/5, it doesn't present enough pressure to really be scary on its own, and you're really looking for all of the cards that you play in ranked to be scary on their own in addition to having good synergies. Battlelore Centaur, however, is good enough on pressure to be pretty solid in draft. Like, it's got a lot of health, which means it's very hard to kill. That stat line is pretty scary. Like, basically 5 health is just really out of reach for most things that you're going to be running into. The endurance means that it can always block your stuff. The 2 damage means that it actually is capable of dealing with all of the little 2-drops, and that's pretty crazy. And yeah, it's pretty fun stuff. So yeah, like I think that in draft this card is a very strong pick, if not an amazing pick. Yeah, like a B or so. Like, it's pretty good, but it doesn't actually pressure the game. It just makes it so that your opponent has to stall out the board, and then if you equip weapons on it, it does become a total bomb, so that's really fun. In ranked, you're not getting enough bang for your buck, and it's pretty rare that you're going to want to play this card. There are a couple of decks that can do it. Basically anything that uses, like, I think Divining Rod and Ageless Mentor are both really interesting choices, but for the most part, you've got more interesting 4-drops to be playing in Rakano, and I believe the competition is very, very strong, as we're probably going to see as soon as I turn the page. Oh, there's the premium one. Yeah, get that shiny. Battlelore Centaur's premium is really pretty. All right, Longhorn Sergeant. We got one more. Okay, again, really not a lot of bang for your buck in ranked, although I think in certain armory decks this is pretty solid. When you Warcry, you gain 1 armor. This counts for double Warcries as well. So if you've got Warcry 2 or Warcry 5, you'll gain 2 armor or 5 armor, which is important. Longhorn Sergeant has Warcry itself, and it's not vulnerable to Torch, which means that as a hybrid unit, it's fairly hard to kill. So you can really use this to spiral relic weapon decks out of control. The main problem is that relic weapon decks have just a ton of good options for spiraling out of control, so Longhorn Sergeant is the only one that isn't immediate, and therefore it's a little bit less flexible for ranked decks. In draft, this card is just bananas, especially if you can get relic weapons. Basically, the Warcry is really relevant. It is very hard hard to kill. The armor is actually quite relevant, and if you get a relic weapon on top of that, or you're stacking a bunch of war cries together, then Longhorn Sergeant will just run away with the game. This card's really strong in draft, and I think you should pick it if you're picking up a lot of war cries. You should generally pick it anyways. Maybe not. It's not amazing all on its own, but it's pretty okay. Navani Warsinger. Yeah, now we get to the fun. This is one of the this is one of the better designs in the set. Yeah, it's a really, really fun card. So a 4/4 Warcry. Its Warcry affects all units and weapons in your deck. I'm probably a little biased because I know the designer of this card. Let's see here. Anyways, yeah, so this card is crazy fun. Let's see. What do we want to say? Crazy fun card. This is one of the Rakano mid-range cards. Once you're getting into the 4s and 5s, you're starting to look into like a more mid-range style of deck. That deck is not nearly as popular on the ladder as most of the other decks, but if you are basically wanting to slow your Rakano down a bit, Navani Warsinger offers a really interesting setup. She has 4 health, so not torchable. She's a hybrid color card, so not annihilatable, and can't be suffocated either. But Vanquish is a pretty easy thing to hit her with, and a lot of decks are going to be running Vanquish in ranked. There are plenty of ways to kill Navani before she gets the Warcry, but even one of those Warcries can affect the state of the game for a long time to come. So if your game is intent on going long, Navani's going to do some really great things for you. Navani can also be equipped with cards that buff her Warcries, like Hammer of Might, Shogun's Scepter, and a personal favorite, War Helm, the card that gives you Charge and Warcry 1. That makes Navani a really, really fun hybrid, a really, really fun 5-drop, because you get a double Warcry for every card on your deck, plus you're charging in with a 5/4. And that's tough for people to deal with. So yeah, Navani's crazy good. She's delightful. She carries a harp. A true sign of badassery. I think in general, Navani's just nuts. And yeah, very, very solid design. I like her a lot. She is an absolute draft bomb. One of the better legendaries that you can pick up in draft. And in ranked, she is borderline playable. Definitely sees play in a couple of different decks. Most of them are Rakano decks that are just trying to slow down for the meta and get a little bit more value out of their just overall Warcries, or trying to do something cheaty. And I think both of those are admirable goals in which Navani pretty well shines. Renegade Valkyrie, double damage flying, 1/2. This card is a draft card you pick if you want to play like a particular type of deck, and that deck is the deck that has lots of weapons and lots of rampages and lots of finest hours and all of those things that make Renegade Valkyrie so much fun. In ranked, it's very much the same. If you have the right type of combos, then Renegade Valkyrie can be really, really fun. That level of stats that she has, where she's very, very vulnerable to everything, means that she's not played too often, but if you can get her going, she's definitely pretty crazy. Double damage flying is fun to put stuff on, but I don't think she's an amazing ranked card by any means. I think in draft, she's similarly only okay, but can really run off with a game, so usually worth picking up at 4. Even worth splashing in certain decks if you're running like Combray or something like that, and you have a bunch of weapons. So well worthwhile in certain draft archetypes. Righteous Fury, give a unit lifesteal and double damage, 4/4 as a fast spell. This is a fun trick, and this is a really fun trick because unlike most combat tricks, it is not a trick that gets you value. Most of the time if you're playing a combat trick, you're trying to basically get ahead by a card. This is not about getting ahead by a card. This is about making the game impossible for your opponent to win. So you attack with like an 8/8 or something like that, give it Righteous Fury, it gets lifesteal and double damage, it deals 16, you gain 16. Your opponent maybe has a removal spell for it afterwards, but at that point, you're so far ahead on tempo that it's quite possible that you're just going to take the game with an Obliterate or a Flame Blast or any sneaky unit, or really just about anything that you can do to sneak through a bunch of damage. This is one of those cards that sort of defies the expectation of card advantage and is actually quite good. Righteous Fury is crazy fun. It really combos well in a lot of different cool ranked decks, and it's well playable in many of those decks. Rakano Righteous Fury is a real archetype, and it is the equivalent in many ways of Rakano Deep Forge Plate. And since Deep Forge Plate is a very, very expensive card, this is definitely your sub-in for Deep Forge Plate if you are looking for an alternative. Yeah, I think the card's pretty crazy solid. There's a lot of fun decks that you can put it in, and in draft or ranked, it's actually quite a bomb, despite the fact that it is not a card advantage card. It's just a good fast spell that actually does really, really cool things. You have to put it on something big to make it work, so it is somewhat unreliable. You do have to have the right type of deck, but for the most part, you're going to have the right type of deck. It's just going to be a deck with a bunch of units in it, preferably some big ones. Rise to the challenge. Draw a unit or weapon of your choice from your deck. It gets +2 attack. This is on my list for like one of the strongest cards in the game. It is an extremely good tutor spell, which is to say it is a very good very good spell that actually searches your It's very hard to not fall into Magic terminology with a card like this because I'm not actually sure what to call them. If you're searching your deck for a card, there needs to be a name for it in Eternal. Perhaps Direwolf will come up with one, perhaps the community will. But in any case, if you are drawing a unit or weapon of your choice from your deck, that's a really, really powerful effect that allows you to pick a bunch of different cards, typically whatever you need as an answer. This is the card you use to grab Furnace Mage to kill a weapon. This is the card you use to grab Ikaria because you're nearing the late game. This is the card you use to grab Auric Runehammer because you need an Auric Runehammer to deal with that one Umbran Reaper. You can play a lot of really cute one-ofs with Rise to the Challenge, and you can play just a lot of cards and basically have 8 copies of those cards with Rise to the Challenge. It represents a significant tempo loss, so it will basically take away your turn 4, which means it can only be played in slower control decks. However, the Armory deck is very well suited to this particular archetype. There are some aggro Armory decks that don't want to run it, but I would say that in Control Armory, it's one of the premier cards, especially if you've got Ikaria at the top. So yeah, really, really solid. In draft, it is also a bomb. Like, despite how much of a tempo loss it is, this is going to pick out one of your best units, and it's going to pick out a unit that's very relevant to the situation. You have to build the deck to like get a couple of good answers in there, but most likely Rise to the Challenge is going to be pulling legendaries out of your draft deck, and that's, you know, running an extra copy of a legendary in a draft deck can be pretty solid. Deep Forged Plate, 5/5 Overwhelm Endurance. Yeah, another example of a weapon that can get away with being kind of bad on rate just by virtue of all of its amazingness. Like, this can, of course, obviously be a 2-for-1 if your opponent gets like a Death Strike up, but odds are pretty good that you're going to be stressing your opponent to his breaking point by the time you're playing Deep Forge Plate, which means that Deep Forge Plate will just automatically win you the game. Also, this card usually gets played on quick draw units, which is just disgusting because a quick draw unit with an extra 5 attack and 5 health is so hard to deal with. This goes really well on Rakano Outlaw, it goes well on Crownwatch Paladin, it goes well on Silverwing Familiar, and it goes well on Champion of Glory. And those 4 cards that I have just named are some of the most common Rakano units that you can possibly play. So Deep Forge Plate Rakano is definitely a real deck, and you can definitely look up a bunch of different lists for it. Unearthly ran a version of this up to the top of the most recent RNG Eternal Tournament. It was a really, really solid deck. I encourage you to check it out. I will probably be doing a deck brew on it sometime. And yeah, I think that overall Unearthly's plate decks are typically the lists you're going to look for. There are a bunch of other plate decks out there, and most of them are pretty solid. But yeah, Deep Forge Plate's main strength here is that in addition to the Overwhelm, which is a very, very good way of pushing damage, basically makes Deep Forge Plate into a burn spell, it also protects your unit, which means it's a very, very good weapon. And then finally, that Endurance ability means that it is a card that breaks Permafrosts and breaks Eye of Winter and breaks Flash Freeze. All of those things, if you equip in an endurance weapon to a unit that is stunned, it becomes unstunned immediately. Any curses on it that would provide it with the stun will just slough off. And yeah, in that case, Deep Forge Plate is just really, really solid because it gets you a 1-for-1 card advantage. So a weapon that can be used as a burn spell, that can be used to protect your units, that can be used for card advantage. Lots of flexibility here, lots of power. Generally just a finisher, solid card, equally bananas in draft. Probably, yeah, another one of the best cards that you can get in draft as far as legendaries go. Field Captain, +1 attack for each time you or one of your units have attacked this game. If this card gets silenced, it has no attack at all. So yeah, not gonna get played in ranked. A 5-cost card that is basically no benefit if it gets silenced by anything incidental is just a little bit too weak against big Combre. The card can get out of control in token decks. It will become like a 12-5 or something like that pretty easily, and that's just by turn 5. If you were going to be like playing this on turn 10, if it actually lasted that long, Field Captain will be something that can just kill your opponent and end the game. To that end, it is a very good card in draft. Not as good as you would expect, but still very good. It's got a lot of health, it's got a lot of attack, and it's pretty hard to get a silence out in draft, so worthwhile pickup. Ferocious Stranger. Strangers deal double damage. 4/4. This card is one of the better strangers in the list. It is the one that definitely turns all of your strangers into giant finishers. The stat line on it is okay. 4/4 is not amazing for a 6-drop, but it is essentially an 8/4 in pretty much every situation, so that's pretty worth it. And then the double damage to everything that is permanent is actually a really strong effect. One of the better strangers, a bit slow, so that makes it pretty hard to play Rakano strangers, but a worthwhile investment and could be better when strangers get better. It's my usual evaluation of stranger cards. They could get better when strangers get better, but yeah, Ferocious Stranger seems interesting. Jek the Bounty Hunter. 6/4 quick draw, summon, silence, and stun an enemy unit. Can't be played in draft. If it could, it would be a draft bomb. This is the Jek's Bounty premier card, and it's well worth it. Significantly undervalued, but not so much that it's not actually played in a lot of tournament lists and played in a lot of good Rakano mid-range lists. This is the card that makes Rakano mid-range possible, not Navani. 6/4 quick draw, summon, silence, and stun is a crazy powerful effect. It is not only just a card that is pretty hard to deal with. A 6/4 quick draw is pretty tough and will usually get through damage at times when you want it to get through damage, but also that silence on a stick is actually really relevant, and it's really relevant even at 6 when you're playing it. The stun is also relevant. It is a good card for pushing damage in Rakano decks. It is a good card for shutting down Mystic Ascendants in Rakano decks, and it is a card that you can play at 6 in Rakano decks, which there aren't that many of those that you can speak of. So Jek is well worth it, and he's easy to play, and he fits in a lot of different mid-range archetypes, and he basically just makes Rakano mid-range possible. I think the card's very solid in ranked, and I think the amount of people who have played him can confirm this, but also like more people need to play him because he's actually just a really, really good card. Oh, we got one more. Starsteel Daisho before Ikaria. 4/4, your avatar can attack twice each turn. This is a 6-cost 4/4, so the overall stat line is a little weird. It does have enough health that it can usually attack twice, which is really, really important. You equip this unit and kill like a 2-drop, and then you kill another 2-drop, and you get some value out of it. That's your like bare minimum worst case scenario. Most of the time, actually, your worst case scenario is you equip it and you kill like a 4-drop or a 4 toughness unit, and then you just lose the Starsteel Daisho. And then it's like, still an even trade, doesn't feel that bad to be playing at 6. If you get War Cries on this thing, it's absolutely insane, because of course it doubles up the effect of those War Cries, and it becomes something that your opponent has to deal with just immediately. This card is a very, very good finisher in Armory decks. It's a very, very good finisher in War Cry decks in general. I don't like it as much as Stone Scar Maul in most situations, so the cheap substitute to this card is Stone Scar Maul. If you see this card in a deck and you don't have it, go ahead and try Stone Scar Maul instead. But regardless, they're very equivalent effects, and Starsteel Daisho has some potential to just become really, really crazy. And Starsteel Daisho is just fun. Like, it's a nice design, and there's a lot of potential for this card to get completely out of control. All right, so the last one, and this is the premier card of Rakano, and also probably the premier card of the Empty Throne. I think there is not a fancier card that you can be playing. There's a lot of cool cards that sort of represent the set, like Bandit Queen, and, you know, like just many, many different other cards that are, you know, like Jek himself. There's plenty of things that actually, like, do in some ways represent Eternal, but this card is just a joy, right? triple red, triple green, Ikaria the Liberator is a 5/5 for 7 with flying, endurance, Warcry 5, charge, and Aegis. Aegis is actually how you pronounce that, but I'm going to get it wrong a lot. I think you can pronounce it Aegis, but I could be wrong about that. It might just be a bastardization that's eventually becoming legitimate because too many Americans read it as Aegis. In any case, Ikaria the Liberator is really, really good. And it is the card that you're going to be playing at 7 to end out a game in Rakano colors, which is to say at the end of a long route of armory decks, at the end of a big Rakano mid-range deck, sometimes even at the end of a Rakano aggro deck, although that's rare and pretty difficult considering the rather difficult influence requirements of Ikaria the Liberator. Now, to break this down, a 5/5 with Aegis and charge means that you are almost always burning your opponent for 5 the turn that you play it. Your opponent's not likely to have a good blocker for Ikaria. It's going to deal 5 damage to their face, and then because it has endurance, you're also going to have a 5/5 blocker. But you're also going to have something with +5/+5 on the top of your deck, which means that Ikaria has just turned any random 2-drop into a card that is an absolute contender and has to be dealt with, and any random weapon into a game-ending apocalypse. It is just really hard to deal with a relic weapon that gets a Warcry 5 on it. If it's a Sword of Ikaria, it'll get 2 to 3 cards just for value. If it's an Auric Runehammer, it'll deal an insane amount of damage to your face. If it's a Starsteel Daisho, it'll kill you, and there's really not much you can do about that one. So yeah, Ikaria the Liberator has a bunch of things that she can hit that are really, really good, and even if she hits a card that's not that good, she's still giving you a lot of value for your buck. The flying means that she has a decent amount of evasion, which is nice, but mainly the thing that really makes her scary is that she takes 2 cards to deal with. There aren't that many ways to deal with Ikaria. The only ones that do work that don't pop the Aegis are relic weapons, and relic weapons generally mean that you have to get hit in the face for 5 twice, which means that Ikaria is always getting value at 7. She is one of the ultimate cards for just guaranteed, reliable ways to push a bunch of value and win the game. The only thing that she doesn't necessarily do is cold stone win the game. There are ways to recover from being Ikaria'd. If she hits something small and you manage to kill her with like Protect and Vanquish, then you can resume your ordinary turn and sometimes get your footing back. But the amount of impact that she makes on the board is insurmountable. As a result, she's just an amazing 7-drop. She's well played in a lot of different red and green decks, and she's so popular that she's even played in decks that have blue in them, which 3-color Ikaria is tough to do, but blue decks will find it worth it, and that's why Ikaria Blue is a thing, and that's why Ikaria Gold, which is Ikaria with Time, is a thing, and that's why Ikaria Black, which is Ikaria with Shadow, is a thing. Ikaria is a premier finisher in all of those card decks, and she's a very, very strong card, and she's so much fun to play, and she's such a nice design. I think she's a crazy good card and a good one to sort of end out on the Rakano list. So that's it for the Rakano cards, guys. To the YouTube folks, thanks for watching. Feel free to like or subscribe. I will see you next time. And,